Good evening. Up north in Alaska, Republicans seem to say when their mama grizzly, Sarah Palin, roars, Alaskans listen. A real stunner in yesterday's primary vote there. A race still too close to call. Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski, part of the mainstream Republican leadership, may be going down, felled by a little-known Tea Party opponent endorsed by Palin. And with the congressional elections now just 69 days away, we asked John Carl to join us tonight and tell us what signal yesterday's vote sent. Good evening, John.
Good evening, Diane. They are still counting votes in Alaska, but already Sarah Palin is calling it a miracle on ice.
It could be the upset of the year. Joe Miller is a hardline conservative and until now a political unknown. But with almost all the votes counted, he's ahead of Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski in the state's Republican primary.
Alaskans recognize that, look, this is a heavy-handed government that's put us down economically.
Miller is a lawyer and West Point graduate with little political experience. Sarah Palin's endorsement put him on the political map. In stark contrast, Murkowski has been one of the most powerful family names in Alaska politics for decades. Her father was a former senator and governor. She's part of the GOP leadership and raised more than 10 times as much cash as Miller.
Lisa Murkowski, a proven record of defending Alaska.
She touted her experience and clout in Washington. But this year, voters don't seem to care much about clout or experience. If Miller holds his lead, there will be about 8 Tea Party candidates running for Senate this year as Republicans. Most of them ousted candidates supported by the GOP establishment.
They take pride in the fact that they're running against the system, that they're running against everything that in the past candidates were so eager to have, the support of the establishment.
John McCain was one who was able to buck the trend, but it wasn't easy. His big victory last night came only after he transformed himself into a harder-line conservative, especially on immigration.
And complete the dang fence.
Senator, you're one of us.
And it is not over yet in Alaska. Miller's lead is now down to about 1,500 votes. And Diane, there are still more than 7,000 absentee ballots to be counted. So we may not know the results here now, we are told, for 2 weeks or even longer than that.
Nail-biting time for the Murkowski team. Thank you, John Carl. And we turn next to Iraq. As you know, the U.S. is pulling out combat troops, the president giving a big speech about it next week. But today, insurgents reminded the world they are still there and still brutal. They launched attack after attack across the country, aiming their bombs at Iraqi soldiers and police, now taking over from the Americans. At least 56 were killed, and our Dan Harris was with some American forces when the word got out of the bloody assault, and it came in.
Out on a mission in Mosul today with the U.S. Army's Desert Rogues Battalion, we could hear the reports of the insurgent attacks coming in.
Be aware of two IEDs near a house on the main road.
How common is a report of an IED for you?
Across Mosul and the entire area of operations here in the north, I'd say twice a day.
Today's attacks raise new questions about the heart of President Obama's Iraq strategy, that the Iraqis are now able to take over their own security. We heard 3 very different opinions on the matter over the last 36 hours. Lieutenant Colonel Ross Kaufman, a charismatic commander, echoed the White House, pointing out that the Iraqis have been in charge of security here in Mosul for about a year now, and that attacks here are down by roughly 50%.
You trust them?
Absolutely. I think now what I'm seeing here in 2010 is the Iraqi army is more professional than I've ever seen it.
However, we heard concerns about the Iraqi forces from some of Colonel Kaufman's own men who live and work side by side with the Iraqis.
How ready do you think these guys are?
I think that they're a lot more ready than they were a couple years ago, but they still got a ways to go.
Here is how some Iraqi soldiers greeted us when we entered their barracks. And here is what one Iraqi troop admitted to us.
With the American combat troops leaving, can the Iraqi army keep the peace here?
To be honest, he said, no, we need a couple more years. But the Iraqis won't get much more time. All American troops are scheduled to pull out of Iraq by the end of next year. Dan Harris, ABC News, Mosul.
And also overseas tonight, they have broken the word to those 33 Chilean miners trapped deep underground that there will be a tough test ahead. Today, they were told they will be trapped in the earth for months to come. How did they react? Jeffrey Kaufman tells us tonight. Jeffrey.
Good evening, Diane. What is happening behind me is a massive unintended psychological experiment in group dynamics and survival. We're told that one of the key rules for those on the surface is that they build trust, which is clearly why they decided to tell the truth. In these first close-up images of the rescue effort, you can see drills working to create more access holes to the chamber half a mile underground, where the 33 miners have been trapped for 20 days. As family members on the surface are granted more access to their loved ones below, government officials and psychologists decided it was time to tell the men the truth about how long the rescue may take.
As you may know, it's a 3-month period, 90 days, beginning from now.
The minister told ABC News that a natural leadership structure has emerged underground. The foreman, Luis Ursua, is recognized as the group leader. The oldest miner, Mario Gomez, who once survived a shipwreck, is the spiritual leader. And the only man with nursing training, Yanni Barrios, has emerged as the medical leader doing psychological evaluations. All of these are encouraging signs, according to experts.
I think it's a very good thing that structure is starting to emerge in that group. It will add civility and a more normal feeling if they have that kind of structure while they're in the mine.
Adding to the tension, an earthquake 4.5 in magnitude struck very close to here this morning. We didn't feel it, but machines did record it. It's a reminder that this cannot be considered a successful rescue until those trapped men are brought to the surface alive. Diane?
And from Chile tonight, Jeffrey Kaufman. Back to the brouhaha in this country. Well, if you think you had a bad day, imagine being the person who filled out the application form for New Jersey to receive money in the Race to the Top competition. It's a lot of money, maybe $400 million. Winners were announced by the Obama administration yesterday, but New Jersey lost with a failing grade on 2 lines of the application. Lindsay Davis says the whole state was in a state today.
This is our Race to the Top application.
The larger-than-life governor of New Jersey, Chris Christie, is on a tear.
Does anybody in Washington, D.C. have a lick of common sense?
What if you were responsible for making a mistake that cost all the students in your state to lose out on $400 million? That's what happened to a mid-level New Jersey state official. They made a simple but costly mistake on an application for federal money.
Are you guys just down there checking boxes like mindless drones?
Yesterday, the Department of Education announced the 10 states that will split $4.5 billion. They're all winners of round 2 in the Race to the Top school reform grant competition. New Jersey finished 11th. It could have happened to anyone. The governor of New Jersey is quick to point out they only made a mistake on one of the pages, 1 out of 1,000 pages. On page 260, they were asked to compare education spending in 2008 and 2009. But New Jersey's application provided information about funding levels for 2010 and 11.
If you can't fill out your application correctly, there is some indication that maybe you don't have the apparatus in place or the competence to execute the money that you could win.
The Department of Education says a redo is not an option. They say the requirements were clear. This was not an open-ended process. At some point, we had to say, time's up, pencils down. As for the person who's behind the state failing to make the grade,
they don't deserve to be called out in that way.
The governor isn't naming names. Lindsay Davis, ABC News, New York.
It's a real ouch. As you probably know, this Sunday will be 5 years since Hurricane Katrina, the storm that shattered a city and a belief that Americans will never be stranded inside their own country. Our Bob Woodruff was there on the streets of New Orleans when the waters were rising, and he is back at that same street tonight reporting for us. Good evening again, Bob.
Yes, good afternoon, Diane. This is the place. This is the water you saw in that picture. It was really about this high. That was about 4 days into the flood. Before that, it was actually as high as just under the roof up there. A lot of these houses here have been destroyed and torn down. Other ones have been renovated or replaced. But the people here are not angry. They are angry about how they've been treated through most of this time, and they've got a very long, long road to go.
These are the enduring images of an epic American disaster.
We want out of here today. We had enough. We can't take no more.
5 years ago, still difficult to comprehend and impossible to forget. Floodwaters set loose by Katrina forced tens of thousands from their homes. Some sought refuge on rooftops.
How many people are still in here?
Others crowded into the Superdome and the convention center, where conditions quickly turned deplorable.
This here system that's going on around here is wrong.
Misery was everywhere. Relief hard to find. There was little evidence early on of a federal response appropriate for this once-in-a-generation disaster.
We are in desperate need, and we are Americans. It is terrible.
Hundreds here died in the storm, and in the initial days, dozens of bodies were simply left in the streets, a sickening sight in an American city. It was a few days after the storm, at the corner of Magazine and Jackson, we met a man who had walked the streets of his neighborhood and had taken it upon himself to bury a stranger whose body had been laying in the street for 4 days. John Lee said he couldn't just leave her, remembering the nuns who would never have forgiven him for doing nothing.
Please go.
He asked us to leave him in peace.
Go.
5 years later, we went to find John, and we did on the same corner. John has chosen to stay, living in New Orleans, working in education. He told us while burying the woman, neighbors came and told him stories about Miss Vera.
It was just the most inhuman, degrading thing I've...
He learned she was a married mother of 2 who had a constant smile and a meticulous garden. She would never have expected her country to have failed her.
We were left here, it was just neighbors helping neighbors, with food, water, burying the dead.
Basically, the administration let you down.
They abandoned us.
And where Vera once lay, a shrine now remains. To John Lee, Vera's memorial is an emblem of lingering grief, a memento of neglect.
I love you, Mr. John.
Love you too.
A close friend of Vera Smith helped John bury Vera that day. Then, like so many others, she left New Orleans for good, returning to visit this week for the first time since the storm.
We'll never forget you, Miss Vera. No matter how many storms, no matter how many years, we'll never forget you, Miss Vera. We love you. Rest in peace.
Amen.
Rest in peace.
It's a small reminder of what should never have happened 5 years ago.
You should know that the head of FEMA says that the agency has learned so much from Katrina that they've actually revamped everything. They now have a plan to get emergency supplies and personnel in place just in case there is another disaster. Diane?
Thank you. Such a moving story of a stranger's life and what we learned. Thank you, Bob Woodruff. And Bob will have more reporting from New Orleans tomorrow night.